Thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm the warm down act, and I will try and be quick, so that because I know we're a bit over time. First lesson is get a Mac. Yes. So I'm going to talk to you about ICU resources for all this extracorporeal support, and I'm going to start with a little bit of a story, because for us, assessing our the resource implications at Wythenshawe for ECMO was really about what happened over doing ECMO for swine flu, and then the bidding process that ensued after that to look at how much it was going to cost us to take on this service. So ECMO at Wythenshawe started with Professor Yonan, who had the foresight to get CenturyMag pumps in and start to look at this support for immediate post-transplant patients. And over the years we started doing more and more of that. So when swine flu hit in the winter of 9-10, we were in a position to offer some ECMO support. And what happened, as many of you will know, that Glenfield, which were pretty much the only centre in the country doing adult respiratory ECMO, were under enormous strain. So the government basically turned around to the transplant centres that had some ECMO experience and said, will you be able to help in this situation? And we were one of those. So a few of the doctors, some of the nurses went down to Glenfield for a couple of days, get a bit of experience and did some training. We had the National Commissioning Group come up to us and look at our facilities to kind of rubber stamp the process. So we were all ready to go, really excited, and then nothing happened. We didn't get a patient. So that was the case that year. But then the following year, swine flu hit with an even bigger kind of wallop, and we got a phone call saying, oh yeah, you know, last year we said, do you think you'd be able to help if we needed some extra ECMO beds? Said yes. Will you be able to help this year? Yes. And I think within an hour we got a phone call saying, can you go and get a patient from Durham who's on, you know, all sorts of support and critically ill. And over the next couple of months we were extremely busy, and one of the zones in our ICU that has a six bedded area was converted into just every bed was had an ECMO patient in it, and it was amazing the amount of resource it sucked in at the time. It seemed that there were a lot of people in there. There was, you know, boxes of hemofiltration fluid, and every patient was on a filter as well, and it was organised chaos. I mean, it was exciting, but. And then on top of that, as many of you in the room will have experienced as well with the whole swine flu thing, there was all the media to deal with, because they were interested in all that was going on in the bigger hospitals that were trying to look after these swine flu patients with this new technology. So what happened after that was in the April of 2011, the Department of Health had decided that they were going to commission some more adult ECMO centres, and there was talk about 9 or 10. In the end, it ended up being 5. But all those centres, largely the transplant centres that had done ECMO for swine flu during the winter, we had to really look at all of our costs and our processes and decide, you know, did we want to bid for this gig, as it were, and how much was it going to cost us? Because it was a competitive tendering process, so it was important how much it was going to cost and what we were going to get paid. So, and if you tendered a lower cost, you were more likely to get it. So we had to look at things very carefully, and it was amazing, really. We only looked after 11 patients. It's, you know, it feels slightly embarrassing. It wasn't very many, and it was about 150 days of ECMO bed days. But the amount of work it actually created at the time was a lot. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about you know, how we looked at that at our resources. So first of all, the medical staff. What were we going to have to? It was one of the trickiest things. What were we going to pay consultants to get in the back of an ambulance and go out and collect people from other ICUs around the country, sometimes by air? You know, it could be retrievals that could take over 12 hours. How am I going to convince my colleagues that this was a good idea to get in the back of an ambulance and spend a considerable part of your on-call extra doing this sort of stuff? So that was a big issue. At Wythenshawe, at the time we only had one on-call rota for cardiothoracic anaesthesia, and you covered ICU and you covered theatre. And we were going to have to split that, because you couldn't have somebody out on a 12-hour ECMO retrieval when they might be asked to do a transplant at night. So convincing some of my colleagues to go from effectively a 1 in 11 or 1 in 12 rota to a 1 in 6 was difficult, but we did get there. We were going to need more consultants to run this service. On-call pay was going to go up. And it wasn't just actually the retrievals, but the other things that went with running the ECMO service, and particularly dealing with referrals on the phone, because sometimes you can have 3 or 4 referrals in a day, and I mean that's not common, but nonetheless dealing with those phone calls can take a long time, and we had to find an ECMO director as well. Nursing wise, these patients at Wythenshawe initially were extremely high dependency, so they were requiring more than one nurse to look after one ECMO patient. And to start with, we had 2 nurses looking after an ECMO patient. One nurse that would really look after the circuit, and another nurse looking after the patient. The dependency isn't as high as that now because we're more familiar with running it. But so if you think that it takes about 5.5 whole-time equivalent nurses to run one ICU bed, if you want to open a bed, that's how many nurses you need to employ to kind of cover annual leave, maternity leave, all that kind of stuff. You're looking at 11 nurses just to open one bed, and on top of that we needed an ECMO coordinator, so a nurse that would take a lot of the referrals and troubleshoot some of the problems. So that's additional nursing staff. We needed a lead ECMO nurse to run the service, which is Pete, who's on the far side of that picture. And there was all the teaching and training time that would be required to train our own specialist nurses on site, because that was something that we wanted to achieve, which we have over the last few years. Our perfusion department's been getting busier and busier, and particularly for them, I suppose, as well as some of the other groups of staff, a lot of the extra work is out of hours, it's on call, and that does create a bit of a problem, because if a lot of your work comes out of hours, those people that you employ to cover that work, they need something to do during the day, and if the cardiac work isn't going up, particularly in theatre, the work can be spread a bit more thinly between the people that are there during the day. But we did employ another perfusionist. Hi. Come on, good talk. So the on-call work versus daytime work kind of balance for everybody on the team, you know, the medics included, but particularly a perfusionist, is something to be thought about. And there's teaching and training involved for the perfusionists as well. This affects all, you know, allied healthcare professionals. I think particularly our physio team end up spending a lot more time with ECMO patients. Not just on their chest for the respiratory side of things, but as we've already seen, some of these patients are staying on ICU for an extremely long time, and they do have, you know, neuromyopathies that need a lot of work. We needed extra dietitian, speech and language therapy team. A lot of these patients ends up with tracheostomies and all the sequelae from that. And there's a long list. This affects the whole hospital, there's no doubt about it. You know, the cardiologist has been involved. The amount of thoracic surgery that respiratory ECMO patients have had to undergo, a lot of thoracotomies we've done now. The general surgeons, I mean, even I think just last week on our ICU we had almost had a general surgical ward round with 3 laparotomy patients, and that was in the heart failure ECMO patients. So general surgery affected. We've had obstetric patients on ECMO. ENT for bleeding tracheostomies and etc. Vascular surgeons, radiology. I mean, we CT every ECMO patient usually within 24 hours of admission. So the demands on the radiology service have gone up. We've got a microbiologist at Wythenshawe who's particularly involved with the ECMO service, and so we've given PAs to microbiology for that. So investment there. We're actually in the middle of negotiating a bit more haematology input, because obviously the transfusion requirements of these patients and their coagulation and thrombotic issues are paramount. Blood bank, and then even more relevant, I think, to the heart failure support and putting pumps in is the theatre time, which haven't really impacted on respiratory ECMO so much. But the displaced cases that you'll have from taking patients to theatre, so you know, you're not doing your urgent coronary grafts, you're putting a BIVAD in somebody. So the impact on theatre is significant as well. So you can see it costs a lot. I mean, we all know that anyway. You knew the answer to my talk was going to be the impact is huge on the resources. And that's why there's a lot of interest at the moment from the ECMO centres particularly about how this is going to be commissioned, because at the moment it's not commissioned in quite the right way, and not as the ECMO support for heart failure is not commissioned in the same way as ECMO support for respiratory failure. I think the most important thing about the commissioning for the respiratory failure side of things is that there's a daily rate for a bed day on ICU, and it is quite well paid. So the length of stay, to a certain extent, you're compensated for, because you are being paid for every day that the patient is there. That isn't quite true for the heart failure patients. So from what I've said, you might gather that the majority of cost of looking after these patients is actually pay related. It's a human resource issue. The non-pay costs are largely drugs, antibiotics, sedation. Blood and blood products is a big cost, but that has been coming down in all the ECMO centres. We all look at our bleeding rate and transfusion rate, and I'm pleased to say that's been coming down. Equipment is obviously a cost, but you know, as we've already said, a CentriMag is not the most important, not the most expensive part of the process. We had some capital costs related to setting up a mobile ECMO service, so buying the trolley, mobile transesophageal echo kit, some extra infusion pumps and hemofilters, but that wasn't the largest chunk of money. So funding for VA ECMO, as I've already alluded to, there are some differences, and it's not commissioned yet in exactly the same way, but we all hope that it will be in due course. So I've talked about theatre. I haven't mentioned the surgeons much, but as you've already gathered from the surgeons that have spoken, and I know from I know how hard Venkat works. It's an enormous amount of extra work for surgeons that take on these colleagues. Particularly, we've seen about 50% of them need restenotomy, so the going back to theatre in the middle of the night for packing and reopening is common. We've briefly mentioned retrievals. Now, some of us have undertaken retrievals for heart failure. I think we've done a couple from Wythenshawe, but it isn't actually commissioned. But it does seem a bit of a daft situation in that we've got all the wherewithal to do it. We've got the setup, we've got the rotor, we've actually got surgeons on call, perfusionists that can go out with us, lead nurses. So we've got the wherewithal to do it. It's just not quite funded in the same way as respiratory ECMO retrieval. It just seems a bit daft to me that you've got all the kit and all the setup. It's just because it's a bit more heart failure than lung failure. It's not treated in quite the same way. So I think the most important difference in the funding at the moment is this issue about the daily bed day rate. And the funding does have some clinical implications, as we've already heard a little bit. We are, through different surgical techniques, Venkat's been very keen to try and avoid a stenotomy by using the axillary artery for central ECMO, so that when you come to plant a longer term LVAD or do a heart transplant, you've got a virgin sternum to go through. We try and aim to get them onto a BiVAD early, and in our unit, once you get the oxygenator out the circuit, that decreases the nursing inputs. That immediately frees up a nurse so you can do another case, get your coronary grafts done. Over time, we are aiming for less nursing dependency. We quite often have one nurse floating between 2 or 3 patients, if to look after the ECMO side of things. And of course, all this, as we've mentioned several times, think where are you going? What's the destination therapy at the end of all this? So. This is, I'm sure, very familiar to you all, and certainly at Wythenshawe, and I know in some of the other centres, cancelling routine or semi-urgent cardiac surgery because the beds are occupied by ECMO patients is a big issue. So, the patient's been cancelled because there's no staffed ICU bed. And it is about staff, it's about human resources, it's not about a bed. Physical beds are not a problem on our unit. We've got spare beds, it's just having the nursing staff to look after them. And I think I'm right in saying that about the last 2 years we've done about 175 bed days of VA ECMO. So that's not including RVAD, temporary LVAD or BiVAD. This is the bed days where we've needed 2 nurses to look after the patient. And that is on its way up. And in the last 6 months, just looking at the figures the other night, in the last 6 months we've had an average of 72 days a month of non-ECMO mechanical support, and most of those have been BiVAD patients waiting for a heart transplant. So for the last 6-7 months or more, if you go onto our ICU every day, there are 2 patients sitting there on bivads waiting for heart transplant. So the resource implication in terms of nurse staffing and bed availability is big. So in total, that's greater than 800 bed days per year that we're using on our ICU to run this service. So it's got huge resource implications. So just lastly, just to allude to some things that we've already been mentioned, I mean, this is about using ICU for those that are going to benefit from it the most. I put this picture of Sam Roden, this chap who actually had an eosinophilic pneumonia, and he had respiratory ECMO for nearly 2 weeks, about 3 years ago. Within a year, he ran the London Marathon in less than 3 hours. And he lives about a mile from the hospital, and him and his wife have actually set up a family support group for patients that are on relatives that have got patients that are on ECMO, and they've been a fantastic support to our unit. But unfortunately, not all patients fall into the category that he's in. Of you know, he's gone back to work and is leading a great life. So you know, we need to be very careful, don't we, about who we're using this resource for. And I put that quote up there because I think that sums it up. Just because we can, it doesn't mean that we should. I'll share with you our retrieval service in Wythenshawe about 1,000 years ago.
Bring out today! Bring out today! Bring out today! Here's one. 9pence. I'm not dead. What? Nothing. Here's your 9pence. I'm not dead. Here. He says he's not dead. Yes, he is. I'm not. He isn't? Well, he will be soon. He's very ill. I'm getting better. No, you're not. You'll be stone dead in a moment. Oh, I can't take him like that. It's against regulations. I don't want to go on the car. Oh, don't be such a baby. I can't.
So we need to think about who we're actually using the resource for, and things now look really slick. I mean, some of this kit is so clever. It's very easy to put the pipes in, but I think what happens after that is that's where what we're paid to do as doctors and make difficult decisions comes into play a bit more. So in summary, yeah, it's very expensive, and a few patients are going to account for a lot of bed days.
Thank you very much.